Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you are listening to us. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Grow Your Brand series. If you only joining us now, because I've seen there's other people who've been waiting for us, you'd know that we've traveled, from the beginning. We had a discussion on episode one with one of our guests or two of our guest judges, and we discussed, what it takes between a brand, or what rather is brand versus marketing. Then we went on to talk about documentation and governance in the second episode. And our third episode, we had our headline sponsor, global head, which was Miss Lindy Lou, who actually spoke about, marketing, spoke about banking, and spoke about quite a lot of stuff in that regard. So this episode is on digital, something I personally love. I think one of the disciplines within marketing that I really, really, really do love, and have also had the opportunity to go through and be a digital marketing specialist. So I'm quite excited to have a conversation with both of our guests today. But one of our guests, of course, we have Mr. Brian Majuru. Am I saying it correctly?
You hit it. You hit it. That was the right one.
Okay, Mr. Brian, can I then, ask to please introduce you for you to introduce yourself to the audience?
All right, that's perfect. So, thank you so much just for the intro on the name. And essentially, I am the consumer intelligence lead at AB InBev. I work in our in-house agency, Draftline and Co. And I have been doing this digital thing for quite some time now. This is actually year five. Started off in
Okay.
a bit of strategy, then I moved into analytics, and then now I am the consumer intelligence lead.
So you're the data guy. You're the guy they go to understand who this person is.
When I started my role, someone called me the insights guy. So I'm data guy, insights guy,
True
all the
true to
guys.
form. True to form.
Yeah, so
Love that.
definitely that is me.
Yeah, and I mean, so we have this Grow Your Brand series, which is about entrepreneurs who are like, listen, I either have, and maybe not even just entrepreneurs, because I think entrepreneurs is somebody who's actively doing or who has a business. But this is somebody who's saying, listen, I've had an idea, thought about it, dusted it. So, the whole Grow Your Brand series is kind of helping somebody to say, okay, let's dust that. Where do you start? Where do you go? And now this episode is really touching on the digital side of things, and you find that digital can be quite daunting. I think millennials, Gen Z's are those who've grown in it, and you'd find that your Gen X's and Gen Y's and your other generations find it quite daunting to say, okay, let me start. So they had the businesses, digital came, they had to figure out, so they probably just grabbed a millennial there and there. But we're in this age of digital and can be quite daunting. But what is it, and how can business actually utilize digital?
So I think the first thing and point of order really is to demystify the word digital, right? Because it's seen as this broad term where there's so many things I need to think about when it comes to digital. Already that creates that view that it's so daunting. But in the simplest of terms, right? Digital is the technology and the online platforms and the data that you use to connect with people and your consumers or your customers. And I think in the context of every business needing digital for their businesses, let's just look at a few quick numbers, right? First number globally, there are over 5.6 billion internet users. So, with that being said, you can already see the reach that all these different online platforms has. Then, secondly, if you think about it locally, there's a really great report that I'd urge anyone who's watching this to read. It's called the We Are Social Report. Really great stats there for different countries in terms of digital penetration and how it works. But essentially, the second most important thing to think about in our context, we already have more than 40 million people using the internet in South Africa at the start of this year. And then internet penetration is already sitting at above 70%. So thinking of that and the amount of people that you have the potential to reach, that's one big opportunity. And then think about the context of the fact that with all these people, these 40 million plus people, they're spending up to 9 hours on the internet. And I'm not sure what your screen time is. I think I'm sitting probably like a 3, 4 hours. I'm trying to get my work done, but I've got the phone too. And I
Yeah.
think what's important here is really making sure that you leverage all the technology and the online platforms to the best of your advantage to reach this potential audience that you have, right? But the only other point I would make is from a devil's advocate point of view. If we really think about it, if a business is achieving their objective, right, and it doesn't necessarily involve any digital elements, then that's acceptable, right? Because if you want to achieve a certain level of success and there are certain tools that you didn't need to use, there's definitely nothing wrong with that. But in this day and age, for any business, as much as you can achieve your objectives without digital, if you want to have that far reaching scale and be able to connect with even more consumers, digital is definitely the way to go.
Sure. I love what you mentioned where I mean if you're meeting your KPIs and your KPAs, there's no need to stress because I think then, the second part to that question is you jump on everybody's like when you open up a business, you need to have social presence, you need to have online presence. And I suppose if you're new then, so maybe my question rather is when I start, where do I go? I'm a business owner. I open all the accounts. Maybe I'm in mining, for example, and an account is not necessarily talking. An Instagram account maybe is not talking to me because the cracks of the business, actual business, isn't what I'm going to talk about. So that's for
Hmm.
maybe ability. So what do I do when I start?
I think the most important thing is there's one step back that you need to take. And that step back is your business. What are you actually trying to achieve? And then once you know that, the second step is how will social media then help you in achieving that goal? Because the
Mm,
thing we tend to forget sometimes is social media is a tool. And in terms of digital and the technology and the online platforms, all of these are just different tools that we can utilize, and we need to find the best way to leverage those tools. So then to take a step deeper into answering your question around the point of, okay, cool, I'm here on all the platforms, where do I start? I think there are three really important things that you should think about and focus on. The first one is think about the type of people you expect to find on these different social media platforms, right? Because the reality is two things. Number one, each social media platform is made different. Therefore, you might find a specific core demographic in that social media platform. Then, number two, not every single person is on every single social media platform. So the sizing is different, right? Because if we go back to the We Are Social report, as an example, WhatsApp is the biggest platform in terms of the amount of people on it in South Africa. Followed by that, it's Facebook, right? And then you've got Instagram and the rest. And I think the reality is the type of people you're going to find on Facebook and Instagram, as an example, those would be 25 to 34, given the data. But then if you look at TikTok as an example, that you might find a bit of a younger audience because, as an example, alcohol brands can't necessarily advertise on TikTok because the skew is younger, but they can advertise on other platforms. So if you just focus and think about the type of audience you're going to find on the platform, that would be the first step. Then the second thing you should actually start thinking about is what do people actually use the platform for? And this is such a big learning, whether it's for a small business or big business, because back when I was working in strategy, we used to do it the other way around, where we say, what is Facebook good for? What is Instagram good for? What is Twitter good for? But the reality actually is now we need to focus on what is the consumer trying to achieve on that platform, and then how do we add value to them with whatever our service or product is, right? So as an example, we all know, I'm sure you've seen the articles as a fellow lover of digital, where everyone's saying TikTok is the new search engine because I
yeah.
found this particular thing, right? And I think the logic behind that is the fact that people are going onto TikTok to find solutions to certain things or to find information about certain things, right? And if you as a brand understand that TikTok has a younger skew and it is essentially a search engine, then what you need to offer is valuable information that will speak to that younger skew when they are searching specifically for something that you can offer. And then to
Mm,
give another example, Twitter, right? Twitter, as we all know, this is that real time platform where we're going to engage when there's a match, when there's a TV series going on, or when there's a big premiere, or whatever it may be. And again, the logic behind that is, okay, where do you then plug into the relevant conversations that are happening right now? And that's really the thinking that needs to go into there. And then when you go into the third point that I just want to highlight is your competitors, right? Because it's one thing for you to understand the audience that you're going to get into that different platform, and it's another thing to understand what they're trying to achieve on that platform. But it's also really important and useful to see what's the lay of the land, how are other competitors behaving on this platform and activating, especially in your category, because it's going to give you a very clear view of, okay, this might be the way I can differentiate, and then highlight the uniqueness or certain aspects of my service or my product that will actually add more value to these people, right? And I think just an anecdotal thing, it's so funny that even with the ability to find and look at what competitors are doing, we also tend to end up doing similar things. So as an example, there's so many tech companies that love showing flat lays of here's the photo there, and then you've got the flash drive there or whatever. And I'm just like, what is going on here? Car companies, right? Car
Yeah.
companies love showcasing their cars speeding around
Yes.
a bend mountain, right? And having that
Yeah.
viewpoint. And I'm just like, sure, that's interesting, or it does showcase the aerodynamics of the car. But
Yeah.
logically speaking, is there a way that you can actually say, I've noticed this particular trend when it comes to competitors, then how can I actually move completely differently? So I'd say those are the three really important things to consider.
And I think your last part touches then on my next question, where how do I differentiate myself? I mean, like you said, we're doing aerodynamic vehicles, but we're all doing aerodynamic vehicles.
Mm,
So how do I, as a small business, and I think the beauty about technology or digital, or for me, I think what I love about it, it has leveled the playing field. Is that you find a big brand, small brand, mid brand. So we have all the opportunity, but now it's the different types of content that we're putting together. And I mean, there's brands that are South African case studies of how they've actually developed just from creating content. And like you're
mm,
saying, understanding my target audience. So, and it will be my other question after, in terms of, I think one of the
mm,
few things that I do find that we do as not even just small brands, but big businesses, that we have one image and we just plant it across all our social media platforms. But we'll discuss that. But before that, how do I differentiate myself? How do I, and like you've mentioned, is that I sit there and I've watched aerodynamic, and it could be anything. I could be selling food. I could be selling, I mean, the top 16 youth owned brands awards is basically about celebrating brands in 16 different categories. And that's the tip of an iceberg in terms of all the categories that are there.
mm. Yeah, look, I think I really I agree with your point. You made a beautiful point around leveling the playing field, right? That's what digital essentially does. And I think if you want to have a certain level of differentiation, there's really three important things I would say you should consider. Number one, it's distinctiveness in terms of your brand identity and the quality of content and the uniqueness of the content you're putting out. That's something you got to consider. And especially think about the logic behind big businesses, to your point. One image posted everywhere. We do a TVC, put it on YouTube. Sure, that somewhat will get a certain level of engagement. But when you look at smaller businesses, they're more hungrier and they have less budget to actually
Yeah.
spend, say, let's put across all different platforms. Therefore, the solution to a smaller budget has to be some level of creativity, right? Because you need to make that little budget that you have lost. So having
Yeah.
that level of distinctiveness is really important, and that brand identity. Then the second one, I think sometimes businesses forget because you're trying to solve your business problems and you're forgetting that any business, and a good one, exists at solving consumer issues. A good
Sure.
business has to solve a problem, right? So the next thing would be relatability in the context of, are you solving people's problems in a relatable way? Are you communicating to people in a relatable way? Are you even being culturally relevant, right? I think a lot of us tend to forget that the things that people are speaking about in volume is the fact, it showcases the fact that people care about a certain topic, and that's really important to think about. So relatability would really be the second point. Then lastly, consistency. I honestly think when it comes to making sure you stand out. If you have a good quality piece of content and it's relatable to someone, it means something to someone, and you do that at a consistent level, you're definitely going to experience some level of results, because the hungriest businesses win. And also, when you make sure that you're hitting the right note every single time and people can essentially rely on the fact that you will do that, that's definitely going to give you that competitive edge. Now, to give a couple of examples, remember Checkers 60/60 last year with the whole
Yeah.
Tinder Swindler situation in
Yeah.
February. Like when they dropped that ad and then they
Yeah.
also customized their platform to kind of showcase different things. Again, like you can tell this content is distinct. You can tell it's relatable because it taps into something people are talking about and they care about, obviously. And it's consistent because you know Checkers has a certain level of consistency around. We will find ways to connect with consumers in the way that they engage. And then the last example I'd also give is, remember Chicken Licken, right? When they did the Big John reveal. Again, distinct, and then the relatability is Black Panther or kind of whoever's dropping in the same week, and they dropped their Big John reveal, and then obviously the consistency because we know Chicken Licken is always going to drop something interesting. So those
Yeah.
are really the three key points I would say that fall in
I
there.
hope, and just touching on that, I hope our guest, because I know our guest, David Chabalala, who's also known as Slaying Goliath, is meant to join us. We're crossing fingers that he'll come through. But to your point, I think I saw a post one time about a story, and I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Besta, but somebody kind of said, "We're waiting there, David. Where's your image?" Because really on the pulse of content, and there's an image that's going to come from Slaying Goliath that you kind of have to, go and repost one. But going back even to the Checker 60/60, I think they're my utmost favorite brand in looking at how they are so relatable and relevant. I mean, when the cheesecake story happened, I don't know if they have a team that works overnight. I don't know, guys. Their checkers,
They
please tell
really
us.
do. They really do.
I mean, in the morning they had configured, their app where there was cheesecake
Mm,
ingredients. Everybody now wants to
yes.
create cheesecake.
Yeah.
COVID in itself, I mean, I know there was guinas, for example, but they just, just in time, really are quite relevant. Whoever the team at Checker 60/60, I must be honest, I think we've seen these big brands also coming. We saw Pick and Pay also launching theirs, but I don't know if they've become such the market leaders really, and owning that e-com space, so much, yeah, kudos to them. I mean, I think Discovery also have played their part in differentiating themselves from a vitality perspective. So these are big brands, and I think bringing it down, like I say, to personal brands, Slaying Goliath, who really has been that consistent, through his creative being a medium or communication platform,
Mm,
has also been quite interesting. Now, you spoke about hyper localizing. Having worked for global brands, I think you kind of play on the other end. You kind of get what you get from global, and for those that are quite liberal, you have the opportunity to hyper localize for EMEA, and emerging markets, etc., etc. But I'm a person who is from, I don't even have to be Gokas. I don't even think that's the only story. But from
mm,
wherever I am, as a small business, how do I now start looking, intentionally understanding, and or rather, can I also be hyper localizing my content? Because I have a brand, but I don't know whether to start looking at internationally, locally, globally, around the corner. Because different places have different lingo, different ways of speaking. And because social media is quite broad, there's a bit of limitation again in terms of hyper localizing too much, because then you close your audience out. So when do I
mm.
start looking at hyper localizing or segmenting my communication to my audience?
So I think you actually kind of answered the question at the last point, right? You have to understand what your core audience is before you decide how you hyper localize or how you shift strategy. Because if you
Mm,
think about it, once you build a community and a platform, those
mm,
people that are there for your brand, you need to understand them and how to communicate to them. And once you have that up and running and done very well, the next step is then to figure out, if I'm in search for new or different audiences, does that require me to hyperlocalize, or does that mean I need to take a completely different approach? And I think that's always the best way to do it. It's trying to find a way to get your initial audience and then make sure that you service them properly before you figure out the next step. Because if you can't even service your existing audiences, there's no use in trying to hyperlocalize or try different strategies, because you're already forgetting the people that made your brand and the people that are
Mm,
actually carry your brand forward, right? So I would say that's really the best approach. And then as soon as you have the opportunity to start step changing, once you have a big enough audience, depending on it, whatever your objective is, that's when you start figuring out, well, let's hyper localize, or actually let's look at a completely different point of view.
sure. Now, thank you. So what we're saying is one to one. So you can't say you have one person now. I'm segmenting with this one person. So
Yeah.
consistency will help in building that community generically. So, and then we can start positioning the brand differently to different segments and target audience. All right.
Mm.
And I mean, we've spoken about standing out. We've spoken about, segmenting. We've spoken about data. But now, what is it that we've seen? And we touched on one example, for example, where we said, brands find themselves having one content piece, and I can understand you're an HR person function, you are governance, finance, you're everything. So almost one post, let's communicate one thing out. But what are the few things that you've seen maybe working to one's detriment? As much as we're utilizing social media, it is ineffective if we're going to, for example, be on Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, whatever, and have one image pasted across. You would rather have one and effectively use it. But what other shortcomings or underutilization of platforms have you seen?
So I'd say the first biggest one that comes to mind, and the one I feel like it's always not considered. When a platform releases a new feature, right? So as an example, if Instagram says, right, we're doing Reels and we're dropping that next week,
Mm,
what people forget is once that feature is live, Instagram is incentivizing the creators to utilize that feature to obviously showcase what it does. And that incentive of the usage is engagement. So if you're not being able to be flexible enough to jump on Instagram Reels and make it work, then there's an issue. For me, disappeared there. Ah, load shedding. Ish, absolutely terrible. Okay, whilst we wait for her to come back, I'll continue my point. But this is Sada. Okay, I guess this is an ad break, and I hope everyone on the live is enjoying this interview so far. It's just me now, and I think I will continue my point once Bumi comes back. But shout out to everyone who's on live stream and enjoying this so far. Really appreciate the support.
Sorry about that. The beauty of electricity, load shedding, and all of that. So we do apologize for that ad break, unexpected. But sorry, we were touching and we were talking about the main elements, and I think you spoke about things you miss, and one of the points you touched on was, for example, when a platform says this is what the update is going to be, it is an incentive for brands to actually jump on that. And I think just before you get on to the next point, I think that's pretty cool. I think when we started learning about reels, we were so late and lagged because we're like, videos, putting pictures together. And I think with time they made it easy. You can either, purchase or kind of use somebody's cuts, and make it easier for you. Whereas initially I think it was the admin of putting pictures together to a beat. It seemed quite a lot, but it actually helps, and it is to the brand's favor, to utilize such.
Yes, 100%. And I think the sad part when it comes to platform features is if you get on too late, then you probably won't get the benefits anymore, right? And I think that's the importance is the agility in making sure that you are able to jump on new features in combination to whatever your existing content calendar is, right? And another example recently is TikTok introduced carousels. Used to be strictly video, and then now they're saying, right, you can post your images, and obviously we'll go to the beat of a certain thing or whatever it may be. But again, the point is, you have your video strategy, you know the content that you want to do. Make space for the fact that carousels are a thing, and they will definitely help in the engagement that you want. So I'd say that. The next one is aspect ratios. I have a really big pet peeve of you want to do a 16 by 9 on a reel, but a reel's a 9 by 16. I'm not sure.
No, but you know what? This is all I have.
And I think the sad part of even the it's all I have, then rather put it on YouTube. Put it somewhere else where the aspect ratio will actually make sense, right? But I think some brands don't respect the fact that the reason why certain content pieces have a certain aspect ratio is again for the consumer's benefit, right? Someone looking at a reel in the full aspect ratio is definitely much more enjoyable than you have the black space and then that little thing in the middle. It's like, come on, that's hurting the user experience, right? So I'd say that's super important.
And I
then,
think sorry to
yes,
go before you go to the next one. I just wanted to also
yes,
touch on that. I think I want to also highlight the importance of it, because I think the assumption is we have this, might as well let's just post it. But you've touched on quite an important part, which was the the consumer journey or the user journey, of how I'm actually taking what is this called, consuming this content of this brand. There's a reason why quite, frame to frame, large format, so whatever it is that you're going to be posting there is quite bold. Again, reels are quite quick in time. I mean, they actually were just 30 seconds, then they increased it to 60 seconds, then now
yes.
it's 1 minute, 30 seconds. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think beyond that, when you just look at the fact that these platforms are always going to be evolving and changing, and remember, if we go back to the psychology and gets a bit dark, all of these platforms effectively want people to stay on them for as long as possible. So you
Mm,
can definitely consider the fact that any changes and different features that are coming up are essentially ways to optimize how do we get someone to stay here longer and enjoy the content more and more, because remember, all these platforms usually get majority of their revenue from advertising. So
absolutely.
it's really important to consider. Then I'd say the last, yes, sorry, Mpumi can speak.
No, I was saying it's eyeballs. So that's what
Yes.
they need to say this is the reach, what is impressions, all those indicators that they've mentioned. They kind of have to beef it up with people saying this is how long I'm sitting on an
Yes.
app, for X number.
Yes, 100%, right? And I think if we then now go to a different point in terms of things that you miss or the mistakes that small businesses can make, I think this one, it really, you'd assume it goes without saying, but it is really important. And it goes back to what I've mentioned countless of times in this discussion, the objective. But then look at it in the context, right? Sometimes as a small brand, your objective is not clear. So you get a post that performs really well, and you're like, yay, this is amazing. It went viral, or you got all the views, and people
Yeah.
are going crazy. But then the next post you do doesn't perform too well,
Yeah.
right? The issue is the well or too well has not been defined. And
Mm,
the
mm,
second thing to think about as an example is if your objective is engagement and you want people to comment about your specific product, if you got one video where you got 1,000 views and 10 comments that people are just saying this is a fire post, and another video you got 100 views but you got 50 comments of people actually speaking about your product, you would actually say that the first video performed poorly in the context of your objective because the second video is actually what you wanted. And
mm.
someone on the outside could assume, how would you say that video performed poorly if it got less views? But then the context is the objective. My objective is not views. I just want to get people to comment specifically about my product. So
Yeah.
when brands are posting something on social media, always make sure that you know what your plan is and what you're trying to achieve. And then that's also what's going to allow you to leverage your analytics even better and then optimize what you're trying to do. Because if you don't know what you're trying to do, you're planning to fail. And
Yeah.
it's
So
be like that.
you've touched on two pain points, and my two pain points is it's one thing to give a report that has numbers, but it's one thing to analyze those numbers. But there's methodology to this, you know. And you've said, and maybe then the question would be, you know, when I'm putting out my content out there, how do I extrapolate, and what consumer insight am I getting from my audience? Because I can post a picture, like you say, get the fire emojis and so forth. And I think one of the things that really frustrated me when I used to do content with influencer marketers, or influencer marketing personnel, is you'd find that the product placement is not the one that's grabbing attention. So that would be my frustration when I'm going through comments, is that that's a fire hat. I'm like, no, it's just, I just want you guys to love the lipstick. Can you just love the lipstick, you know?
Yeah.
And then everything around that is what actually takes precedence instead of the actual product that you're placing. But I think the importance of actually, and as you understand your community and consumer, is and how do I extrapolate, you know, and especially now that I have data, that's the assumption, of course, is that how do I then look at qualitative reviews, and does it go back then to what you're saying in terms of the objective, and simplifying an objective is what do I want? Because I think
Mm.
then we have terms that we interchangeably use. What's my KPAs, objectives? But at the end of the day, when I post this, what do I want out of it?
Yes. And I think to kind of answer your question in the context of, all right, when I'm extrapolating the data and I'm trying to get that root insight and what to do next, there's really three important things that I essentially work with in terms of the backbone of analysis. And it's quite simple. It's the what, the why, and the so what, right? So the what
Absolutely.
is, right, here are the numbers. This is what happened. This post got 10,000 views, X amount of engagement, etc., in terms of your comments, likes, whatever it may be. Now the question is why, right? And if we go back to your example around, okay, I did this post, everyone's talking about the hat and not the lipstick. So the why you can already see is the fact that people are interested in something else. Then the so
Mm,
what would be, so what must I do, right? And the question is, why don't you take the same content and take off the hat and see what happens? Or why don't you do a close up just on the lips and see what happens? And I
yeah.
think it always goes back to the point of what you mentioned around at the end of the day, answering those three questions still has to ladder back to whatever your objective is. Because if it's about the lifestyle or people just enjoying the content, then it's not really a bad piece if people said the hat is fire and no one said anything about the lipstick. But if
Mm,
it's really about driving that interest and engagement around the lipstick specifically, then there has to be things that you have to change given the performance of whatever that post was. And those three
yeah.
questions really help just structuring and making sure that you have valuable things to think about and take out when it's time for you to start doing the next thing.
Okay. I mean, you've also spoken about engagement, and to everybody out there, I see your questions. We'll have them up and we'll discuss some of the questions that the audience are engaging. Quite insightful. They love this conversation, so thank you so much for such insight.
Thank you.
But I think as we wrap up the conversation, I suppose what is it that we're saying is, you know, engagement, sometimes you seeing, for example, it could be the hearts and so forth, and we know how we're calculating engagement, which I still feel like is a flawed you know, way, but that is besides the point. But we're looking at, you know, comments, they're firing, we're there, thank you from X brand. Why is it important to engage with that audience, as small as they are or as big as they are? But what is the importance of engaging with your community, you know?
Yo, and this one, it's such a fire question because the answer is so underrated and it's really a twofold answer. The first one is intentional and direct communication with the people that are actually interested in your brand, because these people came to your brand for your brand and to engage with whatever you have. So you now have the chance to communicate with them. And that communication then has a domino effect, right? Customer service, brand loyalty. There's so many different things that come from that. Then I think the second thing is, and this is the underrated part, like the real juice in this answer, is the fact that here you have an opportunity to actually research, because you have this entire group of audience that are interested in engaging with your brand, and these are the very same people that can probably contribute much greater to whatever you decide to do next. And the reality is that is for free, right? There is no expense in deciding to do a poll on Facebook to say, right, we're about to drop a new lipstick range and we're thinking of red versus yellow versus pink. Which one do y'all like? And then you start realizing that people actually like pink the most. Then you drop that and you start to see that with the previous point of being intentional and direct with communicating with these people, you start getting extended reach. You start getting these people saying that, wow, this brand actually listens and they gave us what we wanted. So I'm obviously going to tell my friends and their friends to say, come through, this brand is great. They actually listen, they take feedback seriously, and they make relevant changes. And I think just thinking about those 2 points and really finding ways to research organically and for free with your consumers on your platforms, it's so underrated. And brands just sometimes tend to forget that in the pursuit of, okay, we want research from the big agencies, we want to find the research from these surveys or whatever. And it's like, the people are right there on your platform. Why don't you just ask them? And it's not to say that's the end all and be all, but it's definitely something that's useful in terms of whatever case you want to build when it comes to research and development. So you got to respond to your people and ask some questions.
I love that underrated part. I think, to share an anecdote myself, is I've had a short stint at one of I would say South Africa's you know, most loved, or one of South Africa's case studies in footwear. And what we know is the head of that brand is consistently, you know, would post and ask questions, and having come from a global background, is you definitely know everything is NDA hush hush. Like, it's not going to be said up until, you know, you see the product in the consumer's faces. But by the time, I think it's too late. Whereas now there's prototypes saying, do you like, do you not like, how much, you know, and so forth. And you're quite right, it's not the end all and be all, but we're getting to understand the customer, how much. I mean, there's a term in marketing where the value, maybe we're thinking it's 500 rand, but your consumer is just like, but I get it, I love it, but the value for me sits at 300 rand. And Kendra says it also creates lifelong loyalty, being able to not only communicate and just to show it, to not only create but empower a community, can have amazing results on your business. I love that, Kendra. And I mean, to wrap up our discussion, before we wrap it up, I think it's only fair for us to go to some of the questions that the people have had here. I know Sitabile has asked, where do we get, you know, the social media conversation? You said that people can go see the document that they can go view.
So go on Google, search "We Are Social Digital Report 2023 South Africa," and you'll find it. think it should be on Hootsuite. If not, but you'll definitely find it there just in the results. It's a brilliant report and they update it every single year.
I would have loved to have it because I was just trying to go through the comments and then find it and put it. But no problem. I hope, Sitabile, you got that. Sim says, how can we determine or anticipate consumer behavior?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think to be very simple in answering this in terms of determining or anticipating it, yet again, it goes down to what type of behavior do you want to understand or determine or anticipate, right? And then how can your research help you achieve that? So let's say you want to anticipate the fact that consumers behave in a different way from a seasonal level, then your research should have specific questions that speak to seasonality, and then you kind of find a way to get that answer, right? And I think there's also many other ways to think about it in terms of the data that you already have, in terms of what you have access to, looking at that data and then saying, right, there probably are a few data trends that we can already see. Then you can anticipate based on that. So, as an example, if most of your consumers are only engaging with you on Valentine's Day, then you know the next Valentine's Day, you can anticipate that they're coming back and you need to do something even bigger and better. And it also means that if everyone's only coming on Valentine's Day, what's happening between the other days? And then how do you work your strategy based on that? So it really has to be a data-driven approach, and you really have to make sure that you have an answer and a strategy as to how you then work with the consumer behavior.
Sure. Kendra, thank you so much, Brian. Kendra also adds, for those that would love to see, she says the brand Glossier used that exact same strategy, and this is the one that you referred to of show them, tell me what you guys love, what you like. And she says that the results were extremely positive, the outcome of that, and now other brands are following suit. So it is quite important to engage with your audience. You're not doing anybody a favor, I suppose, by you communicating with them. At the end of the day, you're able to extrapolate data, understand your consumer better. What do they love about you? And I don't know if it's, I wouldn't call it a trick question. But having come also from a television and screen arts perspective, I know there was always the notion of, do TV shows actually write about society, or does society contribute to the stories that are written on, on shows? For example, Izo, they said, no, this is how, it was depicting how life was in Ekasi and so forth. So would we say again that we create a product to give to an audience and an audience tell us back, or do we tell them that this is who we are and we don't want to change? Do we find ourselves in a situation like Kodak? Do we find ourselves in a situation like your what is it, Motorola? So who's fooling who here?
Ooh, I really love this question, and I think back to Apple's strategy, which I'll just speak about a little bit. But it's a two-way street. I don't think there's a one set answer in the context of the brand is always going to be right in terms of delivering the product. Even to your point, that Kodak did not change because they said we are strictly sticking to this model, even though there was an increase in smartphone cameras and more people using their smartphones instead of the cameras. But the Apple example is always an interesting one. First of all, are you an iPhone user? Before I go on, I don't want to be in the war.
It depends. No, for here we're neutral. We don't even have phones.
Okay, I like that. Okay. Hey, I want to get the Android people upset.
All I'm just saying, this is for the benefit of our audience. For all y'all watching, why I will not say where I stand.
It's all about the audience. So the iPhone example, they do something that's quite interesting. What they will do is they will create the problem, then sell you the solution. So as an example, when Apple moved from iPhone 6 to 7,
correct,
they said we're taking out the headphone jack, right? Consumers were in an uproar because the logic was, first of all, I'm trying to use your phone and I'm trying to use earphones, and now you're taking it away from me. They said, fine. We're still going to give you earphones, but now it's the earphones that have the lightning adapter. So here's the problem. One, you can't use those earphones with any other device except an iPhone. And number two, you can't use your earphones whilst you're charging your phone. So now people are at a loss for words where they're like, sure, you kind of gave us something interesting here, but is it really helping? Then, lo and behold, AirPods came through. And AirPods come through, and obviously the pricing is crazy because
Yeah.
these are
Entry point.
essentially
Yeah.
these are essentially the normal earphones, but without wires. And with that example, there was a lot of ridicule, a lot of discussion, and everyone was saying this doesn't make any sense. Tell me why now AirPods, as its own company, is worth over $1 billion US, right? And the logic is, as a brand, I think Apple definitely had a clear strategy on, as much as we'll get some level of backlash in terms of removing the headphone jack, we know for a fact that if we introduce these wireless earphones and try and innovate in that particular field, there'll definitely be some sort of return on investment. As much as consumers aren't even thinking like that, they're not even reflecting on the fact that these could be super convenient. Because if you look at it now, tell me, first of all, how many AirPod clones do you see? How many different AirPods are happening? You see, even, I mean, look, we here too, AirPod gang, right? But like, you literally see
for me, I'm just so mad that I fell into the trap. How dare they?
And I think what makes it worse is, and this is a different discussion for a different day, the Apple ecosystem is a whole nother strategy in the context of, yet again, there are certain things that a brand can do to meet consumer needs way before the consumer can even say, actually, this makes sense.
Realize. Yeah.
And I think that's really the reason why I'm saying the answer can never be one size fits all, because it just really depends on how good you are at your strategy and what you're trying to do in terms of connecting with your consumer. And as long as you have a good plan and you execute it and you're consistent, then it works.
Sure. I mean, you really touched on key things, and I would love to have this conversation like till. And I hope our audience have really enjoyed this conversation and taken some, nuggets and elements of this conversation, which was so key. But thank you so much, Brian, for making the time to really have a discussion that like I say, a lot of people say, where can I find Brian? I want to talk to Brian. Where do I find Brian? So where is Brian reachable?
Yo, Brian is not reachable. I'm so sorry. I'm really not a social media dude. So jokes aside, honestly speaking, find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's pretty much me in there doing my thing. And then I would say, obviously, my email, right? You can find me name and surname, gmail.com, work email, name and surname, abnbev-.com, that weird what in there.
I was going to go to LinkedIn, but clearly, if you don't mind to be swamped with a lot of questions and a lot of insights, we're happy. Yeah. But our audience, thank you so much for joining our episode today. Unfortunately, like I say, our additional guest or our other guest, being David Shabalala, couldn't make it tonight, and we hope to be able to grab him one time. But we do want to remind our audience that we have our festival of youth-owned brands on the 14th and the 15th of June, which for anybody who has a business and falls within the qualifications of the nomination of top 16 youth-owned brands. So you are South African, you have a business that has been running for at least a year, you have social media presence or a website, and definitely that you're between 18 to 35 years by the time the 14th and the 15th of June hits, then please, can you go to our sales at top16yoba.co.za, ask them questions about exhibiting. We have a whole big mall. We call it a mall where you'll have all these top 16, or rather just brands, South African youth-owned brands that you'll be able to network with, have conversations with. We have masterclasses of, when that list comes out, it's going to be absolutely amazing and epic. And of course, on the 15th, we have our award ceremony where the top 16 brands are going to be announced. I saw a question of somebody asking, where can I find the 60 nominated companies? It is 64 nominees under 16 categories. To clarify, that will be announced when our press release goes out tomorrow, and voting is going to start on Friday 9 a.m. So please stay tuned to Top 16 Yoba page across all social media platforms: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. There will be communication dropping every time. Please make sure to go subscribe, because also our CRM team is definitely going to be popping you guys emails, vote, countdowns, exhibition, speakers, entertainment. Is going to be an amazing one, and not to be missed, the second annual Top 16 Yobas. So for myself, I just want to say thank you so much, Brian, for joining us, and to everybody out there. And whenever you're going to listen to this session, please do engage, ask questions. Like I said, reach out to us and we'll be definitely ready to engage. Much like Brian said, engage. We will love, like, thank you, goodbye, how can we help, please, all of that. Yes, please. That's what we'll be doing over the course of now up until the 14th and the 15th of June. From myself, Unompumelelo, thank you. Have a beautiful evening. Thank you so much, Brian. Have a beautiful one.
Thank you so much for having me, Mpumi. I really appreciate it. Thank you to the audience for joining, and we'll connect in future.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful one. Goodbye.
Bye.